As we've grown over the years, we've had to make strategic decisions about how we can expand, if we can expand, what's the future of the school. We use each other as sounding boards probably more often than we care to admit. I think we were on the phone nearly every day, and I would manage the relationship with our public relations specialists and with our director of advancement. And so much of it is just taking ownership and leading and driving the process.
When Louisville Collegiate School was offered a once-in-a-generation opportunity to expand its campus within a tight urban landscape, school leaders rejoiced. Despite thorough due diligence, they had to adjust course when parts of the community objected to what seemed like a win-win situation. CFO Deana Paradis shows how the business leader played an important role managing change, which has resulted in a more unified campus with less traffic congestion and stronger community partnerships. Jeff Shields, President and CEO of NBOA, and Howard Teibel, President of Teibel Education Consulting, explore with Paradis lessons learned and successes earned in navigating campus growth. Our great thanks to Community Brands, whose generous support makes this show possible. And now, Jeff and Howard.
Thank you, Pete. Howard, it's great to be back with you for episode 2.
Episode 2. You look great, as usual.
Thank you. That's a very nice thing for you to say. I don't think folks can see that, but I appreciate the compliment. As do you. It's always great to see you. My daughter was in your neck of the woods. She was looking at
hoping she was
DU
going to come here.
I know, and it was really, really close. But at the end of the day, she decided on Penn State, and we could not be happier for her, and her lightness of being now that she's committed and made that choice has just been it's palatable, and so she's really being able to enjoy her senior year and all the trappings that come to it. And just I didn't really appreciate the pressure that our seniors are under with that decision, the questions they get every time they sit down with another adult, et cetera, et cetera. So we're really happy and proud of her. I'm proud of you, Samantha. I want to take this opportunity to say that. And she's going to be a Penn State Nittany Lion. So I'm thrilled.
Can I say I'm proud of her too, even though we don't know each other?
You can say you've met her.
And I'm happy to talk to her anytime.
Yes.
Coaching. All right, Jeff, what are we doing today?
We are talking about facilities, which is really important because what CFOs know, but I think other people don't know about the CFO role at independent schools, is how much time they spend on facilities and facilities management and facilities issues. So this is a great story from our most recent issue of Net Assets that has a lot of different facility stories, but this one's a really interesting topic with our guest today, Deana Paradis. Deana, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Thank you, Howard. Glad to be here.
And you're from the Louisville Collegiate School, is that right?
That's correct, in Louisville, Kentucky.
Oh my gosh. And how long have you been there, Deana? Remind me.
Next month will be 10 years. So
10 years, a decade. That's a milestone. Good for you.
Actually, what was your first job, Deana? Let's get, let's keep this place for
sure. Well, the first 11 years of my career, I was in public accounting with PricewaterhouseCoopers. So
you came from the dark side.
No, I sure did.
She has a lot of company with that background. We have a lot of folks in the NBOA membership that have that as their background.
I can say that because I'm on the dark side, Jeff.
You are on the dark side. That is for sure.
Very good.
Howard, thank you.
It's a great start, though. It gets you, a lot of introduction to industries and companies. Yeah. And so my focus in the latter part of my career was nonprofits. And I just fell in love with that industry and serving those clients. And so when this position opened up, I applied and I've been here ever since. So it's
beautiful.
Wonderful.
So we're going to talk about something that happened at your school, and there's parts of it that are very unique to your school, but there are aspects of it that aren't. And we're gonna kind of start there before we get into the heart of the matter. I know many schools, especially schools in urban areas, that are always eyeing that that property, are always eyeing that building that's right next to their campus. And they say at trustee meetings, if only that came on the market. So during your tenure, is that what your conversations were like about if only we could expand the physical plant, this would mean XYZ for the school. It would have such a good impact on our program and enrollment. Tell me about kind of what was the atmosphere like before the opportunity we're going to talk about today presented itself?
Sure. We are a landlocked school, as many urban schools are. We are over 100 years old, and we were founded in 1915. Soon after that, we relocated to this neighborhood, and we are an historic neighborhood in Louisville, Kentucky, and we've been there ever since. But as you correctly point out, as we've grown over the years, we've had to make strategic decisions about how we can expand, if we can expand, what's the future of the school. And, without going into too much detail, we have purchased up some of the buildings along our street. We've maintained them as they are historically protected buildings. And so we use them for, offices. And then separately, a couple of miles away, we purchased athletic fields. And so we've tried to think strategically how we can maintain our presence in the neighborhood, in which we love, and also, serve our growing population. I'll share that when I arrived here, there were a couple of opportunities to purchase a nearby grocery store, actually across the street. The owners were retiring. They were a very popular family, and a lot of our collegiate families had been wonderful customers over the years. And then an adjacent apartment complex. And both of the owners had extended us the right of first refusal. And our leadership team and our board, and then I am the liaison to the finance committee. We all met and worked through, the numbers, the strategy, the thought process there. And we ended up purchasing both properties in 2015. So that's sort of how the current kind of atmosphere is, or was a couple, 10 years ago when I arrived. But we had grown over the years and purchased other properties since our founding.
Well, that speaks well of the school for sure, at least with your neighbors, that they would make that offer to you. So that day had arrived, and the offer was made, the right of first refusal, and you seized the opportunity. How did you feel about it, that this finally came to pass? And I can only imagine going into the trustee meeting where you say it's finally happened, right?
We were excited, and we were, hopeful, and really thought about, the next 100 years of the school, for example. There were also, hesitancies about, financing two transactions, two pieces of real estate at once. And so we wanted to spend some time. We worked with our lenders, and we were starting a capital campaign in 2014 as well. And that campaign was to allow us to build a new dining facility, a new arts facility, and then renovate our existing library. So in the midst of all of this, we have a campaign and construction going on. So we really wanted to think about, let's give ourselves 5 years of owning these properties, manage, cash flows, and then think about the strategic use of these properties. So we finished our construction and our capital campaign in 2017. And that put us in a place to sort of start using those buildings. Our enrollment was starting to pick up, and we felt like we were in a great place. Around that time, we were, relooking at our debt service and understanding what our needs were. And you mentioned, we had purchased this former grocery store, and it was across the street, and it was next door to an office building that we owned, and we had purchased, I believe, in around 2000. We were using the office building as our arts classroom.
Okay.
So now that we had built a new arts facility, which was larger and definitely more functional, we no longer needed to have students cross the street, which is also, a safety and security perspective. We really wanted to be able to bring all of us into a comprehensive campus. So in the community, there was another nonprofit, Gilda's Club of Kentucky. And Gilda's Club of Kentucky is a chapter of the larger Gilda's Club in New York City, founded by Gilda Radner and her husband. It provides emotional and social support in the form of really network groups and meetings for those facing cancer and or having family members. So they had recently lost parking for their members and had run into a few other issues. And so we made the connection, and they were able to purchase both of the buildings, the former grocery store and the office building across the street. And then they went through about 18 months of construction and combined the two buildings, creating this wonderful space where they have many members come every day for services. And, my plug for Gilda's Club is that they are, the services are free to all. And so we invite anyone over in the community. And it created also just a wonderful shared resource partnership. We were able to maintain parking for our students because their services are provided in the evening, and then great volunteer opportunities. We have middle schoolers over there a couple of times a week. We have upper schoolers serving the nonprofit as well. So that sort of took us, out of the grocery store real estate and the office building across the street, because now we were, one contiguous property. And it allowed us to think about what we want to do with the apartment complex. And as we thought through in our strategy meetings, we talked about, is it campus housing for international students? Do we want to expand to offer students preschool? Right now, we, are junior kindergarten through 12th grade. So it allowed a lot of that opportunity for thinking and strategizing. And then, of course, the pandemic hit, and that did require us to pause for a few years and maintain, status quo. And that's kind of where we ended at around 2019, 2020.
So take us to the time when this expansion of your school was made, where the community became aware of it. Take us back to that time, and what was your role? What was your head of school's role? What was your leadership team's role in that communication and making the community aware that this was going to be what sounds like so far a win-win. It's a win-win for the Gilda's Club, it's a win-win for the school, and it's a win-win for your students. So take us back to that when the community became more aware of the expansion.
Through the end of the pandemic, we grew quite a bit, as many schools did. Our public schools in Kentucky did not open initially. And then we also had a new head of school join us in July of 2019, Dr. Robert McCrae. And so we had a lot of momentum between, a new head of school and then maintaining after the pandemic. And we grew by almost 28% in enrollment from over 800 students now. And then, we had to grow faculty and staff as well to accommodate that growth. So now we have a lot more, physical presence on campus and people commuting to school, whether it's students parking or faculty and staff parking.
I have to interject here. 28%. I mean, yes. I've heard of the pandemic bump for some of these schools, but 28%, you could not have predicted that.
No, and like I said, I think some of it was a new head of school and actually a new director of admission as well. I mean, it was a team effort, so we had a positive momentum, and then you added the pandemic on top of that. So you sort of had both, factors there, and we could accommodate the students, and but the carpool line through a historic neighborhood can sometimes be a little tricky if you can picture
what
that.
Did I tell you, Howard? It's about traffic.
All about parking and traffic.
Down to traffic and cars and parking, especially in urban areas. It's always about that.
Exactly. And so we also continued operating the apartment complex, and we had serviced the debt. We had made investments in the infrastructure. But it was a 1960s building. It had three buildings, actually, 1960s, three buildings, and had about 48 units, and it was not fully occupied. We had slowly started to wind it down as we were making a decision. I led a real estate committee's task force, sort of, ad hoc to the board, and we spent a year or two making a decision, and we decided, one, we were going to start a campus master plan to think about the external pieces and the architecture. And I also led the campus master plan as well. And we made the decision to demolish the three buildings. And there was an existing parking lot there, of course, for the apartments. And it, I think, managed about or held about 30 or so spaces. So we were going to renovate that, create a larger, 50 to 60 parking spot space, also bring in, landscaping, tree canopy, and then better access from the other, side of the street. We then worked with our property manager to come up with a timeline. We worked with, we hired an architectural firm and then a, zoning law firm to support us in the process. We knew that in order to demolish the buildings and receive a certificate to do so, they would have to go through the process of being determined whether or not they are historically contributing. And then the neighborhood is beautiful, these wonderful Victorian homes and lots of architecture, lots of unique characteristics.
Sure.
And we have a wonderful relationship with that committee. It's called the Architectural Review Committee. And because we had just completed our 2014 to 2017 construction and capital campaign, we had been working with them quite directly on building a three-story building, expanding another two-story building. And, there's a lot of detail that goes into the work they do. So we would make minor adjustments that were important to the integrity of the neighborhood that, wouldn't impact on the function and the utility of these buildings. So yes, wonderful relationship. There was not a sustainable future where we could continue operating the apartment complex as is. So we would have had to make significant changes, which would have had to change the demographic or the ability for the current rental tenants to remain. We would have had to, if we sold, they would have been, changed to anything from large condos or, another purpose. So there weren't a lot of outcomes. So we did work with members of the board within the neighborhood, and we invited them to meetings. We met with an organization that helped us relocate each of the tenants. We provided, financial support to those tenants and other services to help them. I think at the point of the hearings, we had around 20 or 25 or so tenants remaining, and we worked to relocate each one of them.
From my perspective, your story really demonstrates how you focus on something that's going to be good for the school, but recognizing it's also about taking care of constituents, which includes the community. And it sounds like you navigated that really well. And I'm sure there were moments where it was really challenging because not everybody understands what the value is, and the value actually shows up over time. I think a really interesting thing for the listeners here, many of whom are business officers, is for you, what was the learning that you took away in your own, development as a business officer for a school where the head has a role, but increasingly business officers play a really critical role in moving change forward, right? Gone are the days when they're focused on the finance and accounting. Yes, that's in the background, but ultimately your role is as a leader. And it sounds like you were put in a position, or you found yourself in a position where you had to play that role. What was that like for you? And what were some of the takeaways for you in your own development as a business officer?
That's a great question, Howard. I do think having the first 8 years under my belt sort of helped me in establishing relationships. So some of that was experience and relationships that had been cultivated over time. However, I would say that a lot of it is you understand what it means to be, the the point person and the person that people are looking to drive the process. And, you sort of can't take a back seat and say, well, I'll wait to see what the trustees say, or, I'll wait to hear from the attorney, or I'll, wait until, our head of school calls. Everyone is busy, and everyone is doing a lot, wearing a lot of hats, a lot of different projects. And so you learn to own, and it's a small business. Independent schools represent, a lot of that small business infrastructure. So you learn to own and be accountable to the process. And so, I drove, the hearing dates, and I met with the attorneys, and I worked with the architects. But then I also had to bring all of those groups together. And I do believe in, more of a relational leadership style where you share in the leadership responsibilities with your administrative team. You communicate frequently with your trustees, but then you bring all of the groups together. If it's the architects, if it's the architectural, it's for us, it's the planning and design group for our metro city, and then other departments in our school. And I'm always updating our head of school, and we use each other as sounding boards. Probably more often than we care to admit. I think we're on the phone, nearly every day. And I would manage the relationship with our public relations specialists and with our director of advancement. And so much of it is just taking ownership and leading and driving the process, as opposed to taking a passive approach.
And letting somebody else, because you let somebody else take the head of it, you're often finding yourself waiting because nobody knows
exactly
if they are being asked or expected to take this role. So I think that's a critical point, Jeff, that especially about a difficult topic, to be willing to have the courage to move things forward, knowing that there's a lot of open, unanswered questions you're going to have in front of you.
Yeah, I love the that you described, Deana, the importance of communicating to interested parties, but the process had to keep moving. Decisions had to be made. So you're really balancing. I'm keeping you informed, but I really keeping my responsibility is keep the process moving, and that requires me making decisions. I really want to get at. We really think of the head of school as being the external role, right? And being the face of the school in many ways. How did you balance your role of really driving the process with your head of school's role, who clearly was probably taking a lot of incoming during this experience?
Right. That's a great question, Jeff. We made sure that we were checking in with each other, almost daily. And I would give him an update to say, here are the conversations I've had. Here's the feedback. Here are our next steps. And then he would relay to me, I have heard from this parent, or this neighbor. We would then work with our communications team and decide when, how, and what to communicate. We, worked with our head of school on presenting, publicly and helping him prepare. He was really dedicated to this issue, and he wanted to make sure that we engage our neighbors and engage those in the community, and maintain, strong relationships, and show that, we care immensely about, the outcome. And so we did want to make sure he was the publicly facing contact for this, because it shows that if the head of school is in there and in the weeds, there is that level of dedication. And so my role was really to, lead him and direct him and connect him with the right groups, and giving him, information at the right time so that we could make those decisions.
Howard, what a great way to form a partnership. I mean, I know it was external, but you and your head of school have really been through something together.
Yeah.
And I think I can only imagine the amount of trust you built, how much you learned about each other. I mean, I'm thinking, because he was a new head of school, how valuable. I know it wasn't easy. There's lots of ways to get there, but you really fast tracked your partnership. Would you agree with that because of this unique experience?
Yes, and remember, he began in 2019, so he was sort of thrust into COVID within a year in a new city and a new community, and that also deepened that relationship, because we were making very similar, community-wide sensitive decisions. So that helped us. We already had a really good structure, and foundation to help us in the next issue. And, here we were faced with the next big project or sensitive project in 2022 and 2023. So, you develop and you create a working style that supports that, and you continue, and it allows you to, replicate the same decision-making framework, for future endeavors.
So imagine a business officer listens to this, or they read the article and they come to you and say, listen, we're about to embark on this. Can you tell me a couple of things for me to watch out for as I step into this? What would you say?
One, I would look for references, those who can share knowledge, those who have, been through a similar process before. I think we all really appreciate when we have a sounding board or we have resources we can look to. So one is trying to find, your own network, and NBOA is definitely a source that I use. I use other independent school business officers in my state as well. But you develop these relationships, you use these resources, and that's sort of a first step, because you have somebody you can ask questions to. And then I think you need to identify potentially impacted constituents. And that, process can be something through the leadership team where everyone is thinking about who are all the constituent or potential impacted constituents, what are the organizations, and thinking through and coming up with sort of an exhaustive list or as best that you can. And then you go through that list sort of one by one, and you kind of identify those touch points. Who should we be talking to? Who can we invite in and have a conversation with? And if you can do a lot of that pre-work and a lot of that due diligence, you set yourself up for, a better chance of success in going through a significant project like this.
So, Jeff, I'm going to ask you, what do you take away from this, listening to Deana?
I think it is a masterclass in going through a difficult situation, but realizing, understanding roles and responsibilities. I think the communication, the transparency, the tenacity that comes through is just really profound for me. And one thing I don't want to lose in this thread, and I think it's so important, because I think Louisville Collegiate School is a story that many can share. But did you hear the caring and compassion they took to identify new residences for anyone who is displaced? I mean, no one would really, I know that's true. I know that's how our schools function and contribute to communities. But to hear that level of wanting to do the right thing, I mean, that just makes me proud. That just makes me proud of the independent schools and the leaders we work with. I just think that's amazing.
I think it's amazing. I think it's amazing too.
I mean, Deana, where did that come from? I mean, is that just kind of in the culture? You knew it was the right thing to do. I mean, I just think that piece of it for me is just profound.
I think we have a long-standing relationship with the neighborhood. We've been here nearly 100 years, and we have developed relationships. And even, one of the properties that we purchased, so we've, since purchased a property in 2021 that was an adjacent building that was offered to us, but the owner was had passed away, and she and her children had wanted to offer it to Collegiate, as an acquisition. So it was relations that had cultivated over time. Her grandchildren are students at the school. I think that speaks to how we have, treated our neighbors over the last 100 years and how they have treated us and how we are a community. But when you put that sort of front and center and remind yourself to continue to put that front and center, then you can make, the right decisions with respect to those impacted. But it is, it's a process of going through all of the administrative paperwork, all of the legal process, and also remembering, what is most important and what is the priority.
Well, Deana, I appreciate this conversation so much. We said this was a story about facilities, but we really learned it was about leadership and communication and really humanity, which I really love. And I so appreciate you coming forward and telling us. What are you leaving with, Howard?
Well, I love, Deana, that you talked about the role that you played and to be proactive, that you look around and you say, all right, maybe this is on me to take on this role and to be a very effective coordinator of conversations and conversations with the right people. And I think that is such a great lesson to remind all of us to say, rather than maybe waiting for somebody else to take the lead, maybe that should be me. So that was fantastic.
Great story. Thank you so much. Really enjoyed it. Howard, another great conversation. I can't wait for the next one.
I know. Next one, should we take this on the road somewhere? Maybe get a bus?
Maybe.
What do we call it? We should call it something. I don't know. Well, the Net Assets Podcast, of course. But
it's called the Net Assets Podcast on the road. I don't know. Cecily,
on the road.
Cecily, our editor-in-chief of Net Assets, maybe that's not in the budget, but that's a great idea. So we'll consider it for the future.
Awesome. Well, listen, thank you, both of you. Jeff, fantastic job. And we will continue. And please, let people know. We will have this posted both on the Net Assets Podcast, but on ours, and there'll be a link to this article. And I also highly encourage people to read it because it really will deepen what you just heard on this podcast.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone.